The people. Some of them aren't real. I looked across the table at Kent, trying to keep my own face neutral as I studied his. He looked bad. Exhausted, but also kind of cracked out, like he used to get that last year of college, but 100 times worse. Back then, the worst he would do was get hyper and maybe a little reckless. Now, he disappeared for 2 weeks and came back looking like a hobo junkie, all restless eyes and nervous twitch in his upper lip. He met my gaze, his mouth shifting briefly like he smelled something bad. I wasn't sure how to respond to this crazy talk, but it was clear I needed to say something, so I decided to go with the obvious. What the fuck are you talking about, man? He gave me a ghastly grin and then nodded as he absently swirled a fry through some ketchup. Kent looked like he hadn't eaten much since he went missing, but he was still only picking at his food. Maybe he was just dehydrated, though. He'd gone through 3 glasses of water since we'd come to the restaurant just a few minutes earlier. I started noticing it last month, yeah? One day I was on the bus. I always take to and from work. I usually like the aisle seats, but that day was pretty full, so I got stuck in a window seat next to this big fat guy that smelled like a Philly cheesesteak, and not in a good way. So, I just leaned close to the glass and tried to keep focused on looking out the window. Just staring, really. So it took a few minutes for me to first see it. Or at least realize I was seeing it. I frowned at him. Seeing what? Kent shook his head slowly. I kept seeing the same dude. Like, we were going up 3rd Street and the bus stopped at an intersection and I saw this guy drinking a cup of coffee or whatever. He was draining the cup and then throwing it in the trash can next to him. I don't know why I focused on him in the first place. Maybe it was him leaning back to get the last of the coffee. Like he was really thirsty. I mean, he didn't look special. He was dressed in a gray suit and had an overcoat on, but there's tons of corporate stuff on the street, so you see executive types all the time. Anyway, we left him behind when the light turned green, and I just kept staring out the window. A few minutes went by. The bus made it like 5 blocks and was coming up on the turn onto Brick Street. Suddenly something caught my eye. It was that same dude with the coffee, except this time he was sitting at one of those outdoor cafes. We didn't stop this time, but the bus was going really slow, so I still got a good 10 seconds to see him. And once I noticed him, I couldn't take my eyes off of him. When he paused long enough for me to interject, I took advantage of it. Dude, that's not a big deal. There are tons of people that look alike, especially when they're dressed up and you're seeing them from a distance. That's all it was. A coincidence. Kent was already shaking his head. No. I looked at him closely, and my eyes are good. It wasn't someone that looked like him. It was the same guy. I shrugged. Maybe he just caught up with you and sat down at the cafe then. You said you were moving slow? Not that slow, and not slow during that whole 5 blocks. Just some of the time. He would have had to run in a suit and an overcoat faster than the city bus for 5 blocks and managed to get sat down before we could pass. Rubbing his face, he went on. Still, I thought the same thing at first. Looking for a logical conclusion, right? He let out a breath as he met my eyes again. The thing was, this guy had food and a drink. He'd clearly been eating for a few minutes, likely since before I had even passed the first guy. Well, then it has to be different people, right? He shook his head. I don't think so. Or at least not in the way you mean. I gave a smile I didn't feel. This was looking more and more like Kent either had new mental issues or had gotten onto some bad drugs. Either way, I didn't know how much longer I was going to be comfortable with keeping my promise. He'd made me swear not to tell anyone where he was after he waylaid me outside my office, and at the time I'd been happy just to see him and have a chance to make sure he was okay. But he wasn't okay. Not if he believed this stuff. And why would he tell it to me if he didn't? Okay, so what do you mean by that? You're being very cryptic. Leaning forward, his voice trembled a little when he spoke next. Once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It's like noticing cars that are like yours after you first get it. Ken swallowed and lowered his head to his hands. I saw that same guy a third time as I got off at my stop. Now I knew something was going on. This was a good 5 miles from the cafe. I ran home and locked the door, convinced that this guy or him and his twins were after me. I didn't understand any of it, but I was terrified. It took 2 days of peeping out the window before I would even go outside again. When I did, the coast seemed clear. No sign of that guy anywhere. I heard a bitter laugh from behind Ken's hands. But then, I noticed the woman. I saw her walking into work that morning. Only noticed her because she was kind of hot for an older lady. Then, when I went to lunch, I saw her again. Maybe she worked nearby or something. Again, no big deal, right? Except, I walked over to the taco place and saw her standing outside looking at her phone. There was no way she could have beaten me there. It was a straight shot, except I walked over to the taco place and saw her standing outside looking at her phone. There was no way she could have beaten me there. It was a straight shot, and except for that bank building being in the way, I could have literally looked back and seen where I saw her 2 minutes earlier. Looking up, Kent waved over the waitress and asked for more water before turning back to me. I went on into the restaurant, asked for a table where I could see out the front window. The woman was out there for a couple more minutes, and then she got in a taxi and left without a backward glance my way. I tried to let it go. Just eat lunch and not dwell on it because I know how I am when I get fixated on something. By the time I headed back to work, I was still thinking about it, but I wasn't so freaked out anymore. I nodded. That's good. You do better when you can redirect that focus. How are you doing with your Kent slammed his hand down between us, making his plate jump slightly. No! You're not listening. Just listen and quit trying to talk me down from whatever roof you think I'm on, okay? Frowning, I nodded, and after a moment, he continued. I left work late that afternoon, and there was no sign of the woman outside this time. I'd missed my usual bus, but after a few minutes, I grabbed one that would take me fairly close to my regular stop. I couldn't wait to be home. I was less freaked out than I'd been at lunch, but I could still feel myself close to the edge of something. Whatever it was, I just wanted to back away slowly and get back to normal. But then I saw the man again. And he was draining his cup of coffee or whatever, identically to how he'd done it before when I'd seen him. Except he was down the street a little bit, so when he threw his cup away, it landed on the edge of the sidewalk instead of going into a trash can. You need to understand what I'm saying. He was doing the exact same things as the first time, but his location was off or whatever. He tried to throw it away like before, but the trash can wasn't there. It was still down the street where it had been before. But he didn't seem to know the difference. It's like a video game, right? You've got these non-player characters that are moving around, mimicking real people, living real lives in this game world, but they aren't real. They aren't really thinking or living at all. They're all just programmed routines they do based on certain triggers. And if the world glitches, or their AI gets fucked up, they start doing things that are off. After I saw that guy again, I knew I had to do something. Either I'd stumbled onto something huge, or I really was crazy. And the not knowing which was true was worse than any fear I had from the strange shit I was seeing. So I got off at the next bus stop and backtracked until I found the guy again. He was just down the street from where I'd seen him throw down the cup, walking along like he had nowhere in particular to be. So I followed him. What the You followed someone? I lowered my voice as I leaned forward slightly. You haven't hurt anyone, have you? He raised his eyebrows. No, you're not listening. You need to... I cut him off. What I need to do is go piss. When I get back, let's head to my car and keep talking about this. Okay? Kent just smiled and nodded. Looking away, I slid out the booth and headed in the direction of the restroom sign. I did need to pee, but I also just needed a break to catch my breath and think through my options. I could go ahead and call someone, probably Kent's mom, as she was the most freaked out by him dropping off the map recently. I can try and shut down his crazy bullshit and make him understand that he was sick and needed help, but that ran the risk of him just leaving again. No. Maybe I was better off just hearing him out. I might understand more if I did, and he might be more willing to listen to my opinion if I listened to the whole bizarre... My phone buzzed in my pants, and I let out a small yelp. Fuck, I was jumpy. I guess the story was getting to me more than I realized. Digging my phone out, I glanced at the name on the screen. Kent. What's up? I'll be out in a minute. Alan? I felt my face drawing into a frown as I leaned against the bathroom wall. Yeah? His tone was weird and he sounded different somehow, though I couldn't quite place it. Did you just tell me you'd be out in a minute? Yeah. I just needed to take a quick piss. I told you that. Alan, where are you? The bathroom, jackass. You think I went to go piss in the kitchen? His voice was louder and more agitated now. No. Where are you? What place are you at? I felt the skin begin to prickle on my arms. At the diner near my office, Roger's Diner. I just left you literally a minute ago, man. Look, are you actually confused or are you just... You need to get out of there. Right now. The fear in Kent's voice killed any idea that he was playing a joke. Okay. Are you waiting out front or what? Alan. I'm not there. I'm not even in the city right now. Whoever or whatever is there with you, it's not me. Dude, this isn't funny. I'm going to come out and we're going to have a serious talk about what needs to happen next, okay? I could already hear him saying something else, but I ended the call and left the bathroom. The table we'd been sitting at was empty now, and I didn't see any sign of Kent through the windows lining the wall. Shit, I hoped I hadn't lost him again. Grabbing the ticket, I carried it up to the register, where a young woman took it and began hitting buttons. I kept looking around for some sign of Kent while she rang me up, and I was so distracted it took me a moment to register she was even talking to me. Sorry, what was that? The girl blushed slightly and giggled. I said, so was it a staring contest or true love? Blinking, I frowned at her. I don't understand. She grinned and gestured back to the table we'd been sitting at. Me and the cook have a bet why y'all were doing that for so long. He says you're just in young love. Me? I think it was a staring contest. Her blush deepened slightly. Told him I think you like girls instead. I stared at her blankly. I don't know what you're talking about. It was her turn to frown. Not making fun or nothing, just... Well, we saw how both y'all were sitting there quiet, just staring at each other for the longest time, not saying a word. I felt my heart begin to hammer in my chest, even as my throat seemed to constrict down to a hole the size of a pin. No, we didn't. She raised an eyebrow. Yeah, you did. Aside from ordering food and your friend asking for more drinks every few minutes, neither of y'all talked for at least half an hour. Just looked at each other. The girl handed me my change with an apologetic look. I wasn't trying to be nosy or nothing. It was just weird, is all. I stuffed the money into my pocket woodenly as I turned to go, but then I stopped and looked back at her. Did you see where that other guy went? In a deeper part of my mind, I realized I was now asking so I could avoid him rather than find him, but I ignored that detail for the moment. For now, the fear growing fat in my belly was more pressing than anything else. She shrugged. Sorry, I saw you get up and head to the back, but when I looked over to the table, next time he was just gone. Nodding, I headed outside, looking carefully in every direction before heading to my car. There was no sign of Kent anywhere. I told myself I was being silly, but I still couldn't resist jogging to my car and locking the door as soon as I got in. There was a flash of panic as I realized I hadn't checked the back seat, but when I looked back there, it was empty. The relief I felt was palpable, and it made what I was about to do even harder. Pulling out my phone, I called Kent back. The first couple of tries, I didn't get anything other than his full mailbox. It wasn't until I was on the freeway that I heard his panicked voice on the far end of the line. Alan, are you okay? The fucking service here goes in and out. I've been trying to get through to you since we got cut off. I'm fine, but why'd you leave? What's this all about? A brief pause, and then, in a calmer voice, Kent replied, Alan, I know this sounds like a joke or something to you. Or you think I'm crazy. Crazier, but I wasn't with you today. I haven't seen you in weeks. I felt anger bubbling in my chest, fed by my growing fear and uncertainty. Bullshit. We just ate lunch and talked. Then I go to the bathroom, you call me, and then you're a fucking ghost? Why are you doing this? What did I say? What? When we talked just now, what did we talk about? Look, man, this is getting really please. Just humor me. I'm not messing with you. Sighing, I glanced up at where I was headed. I'd started going home without even thinking about it. I considered turning around and heading back to work, but I didn't see the point. I needed to deal with this Kent thing now, if possible, both for his safety and my peace of mind. Okay, you were telling me about seeing a man, the same man over and over, but, in ways that it was impossible for it to be the same man. Same thing happened with a woman, then again with the first guy, but now he was missing the trash can. I grimaced. Oh, so now you're just fucking with me. Great. No, Alan, no. I know that stuff you just said because it happened to me. All of it. But I haven't told anyone about it. And I swear to God, I did not talk to you today except for on the phone a few minutes ago and now. Ignoring the clenching pain in my stomach, I got over in the exit lane. Okay, fine. So what's going on? None of this makes sense, and your family's freaking out, and you haven't told my family about this, have you? It just happened. Plus, you asked me not to. Alan, that wasn't... Yeah, you're a fucking NPC or whatever. But you're going to meet me and talk, okay? And by the end of it, you're either going to convince me or I'm going to convince you. Either that, or I'll hang up and call your mom or sister right now. No. No. I don't want them involved in whatever this is. I'll meet you. Tomorrow afternoon? At your house? Why not today? Another pause, and then, because I'm 2 hours away and I need time to check things out here and there before I meet. I've taken to being real careful whenever I go out. It's not just me noticing them. They've noticed me too. I'll see you then, buddy. I went to say more, but he'd already hung up. I turned into my driveway and parked, sitting in front of my car for a moment as I went back over my lunch at the diner. That had been Kent, right? It had to be. And that girl, she was just lying for some reason. We talked plenty the whole time we were there. Didn't we? I got out and headed for the door, the chill in my stomach working its way up my spine. Kent had issues, sure, but he'd never been a joker or a liar, and he'd never been delusional either, and he'd sounded really upset on the phone. Though, if he was crazy, maybe he really would be upset. Feeling a sense of something coming up behind me, I whirled around, pulse suddenly pounding. There was nothing there, of course. Just more of me being scared of nothing, jumping at shadows cast by my poor, sick friend. Turning back, I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. Everything it told you, it's just like I'd said it. That's what happened. Kent was keyed up now, his hands splayed wide as he punctuated his words. This was more like the Kent I knew, high-strung but not strung out, looking tired but not like a homeless drug addict, and yet he was still swearing he hadn't met me the day before. Deciding to go with it just for the time being, I asked him if he'd really followed the coffee man. His eyes went wide. Oh yeah, I followed him. He went into an old office over on Harris Street and didn't come out for like 3 hours. And in that time, another 2 of them had gone in too. I sucked in a breath. So, you're saying you literally saw 3 of the same person go into the same building, and you were watching it the whole time? Kent nodded as he drank from the glass of water I'd offered when he'd arrived. Yep, and yep. Maybe they were leaving out the back and circling around? He smirked. Good theory, except that the other 2 came just a few minutes after the first one and arrived at almost the exact same time. I saw one go in less than a minute after the other. When he saw I had no further argument for the time being, he went on. That was just the start. I gave up on work or seeing other people. I needed to figure this out one way or the other, as the way I looked at it. Whether it was real, or I was just crazy. I didn't want to risk putting someone else in harm's way. So I spent the next few days driving around looking for more of whatever they are. At the diner, you called them NPCs, like in a game. Puffing out of breath, I corrected myself. Or, not you, but the other you. The thing that looks like you. When he still looked irritated, I tried changing the subject. Do you think there's more than one of you? Ken shrugged. Maybe, maybe not by now. He leaned forward and his face grew paler as he went on. I've been in that building now. Just a couple of days after I saw the men go in, I almost got caught a couple of times, but they have trouble noticing things while they're still apart. I raised an eyebrow. Apart? Yeah, they don't stay in multiples forever, I don't think. Or at least some of them don't. It's like they go out, learn about the world, or whatever it is they're doing, and then they come together, melt together into one version. He wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. I saw it happen once. It was so awful. It didn't even make sense looking at it, but when it was done, that one version acted more normal. I followed it for a day after that, and it didn't have any weird lapses the way the other ones do. Kent gave me a weak smile. I would have continued following it for longer, but that night, as it was leaving a supermarket, it turned and stared at me from across the parking lot. Just stared and smiled. Kent's lips thinned to a line. That's when I left town. I thought I was a bit safer after that, but then on Saturday one of them came into the motel room where I was staying. I didn't wake up at first, just when it climbed onto the bed with me. I felt it, or I heard the spring squeak. He shook his head. Either way, I taken to sleeping with a knife. I stabbed it twice and rolled off the bed. It came after me, though it was moving slow. I got to my feet and kept stabbing it until it stopped moving at all. It wasn't until I was done that I realized there was no blood. It was just black leaves. Most of them dried up and crumbling, though a few were softer and wet with some yellow snot or whatever. I turned on the light to get a better look, but by the time I turned back, it was all drying up and puffing away. He rubbed his eyes, like it had never been there at all. I stood up and went into the kitchen to refill our glasses, trying to sound casual. So, are you sure that's what happened? I gave a soft laugh. No chance you killed a real guy and just think it was one of those things, right? I could hear the tension in his voice when he answered. I honestly wish I had. I know that sounds terrible, and I wouldn't want to hurt anybody, but at least it would mean I was crazy and none of this is real, but it is. You seeing my NPC proves it. It has my memories. My personality. Either they're getting better at mimicking real people, or I don't know. I don't know if those other NPCs were real people they copied or ones they made up. I handed him back his glass as I drank from my own. But, look, I'm not trying to say you're crazy or wrong. But why would they go about it like this? If this is, what, aliens, monsters, devil, robots, whatever it is, why would they let multiple versions of the same person out at once? Particularly when they all act fucked up and weird. Kent nodded. I wondered that too, at least the first time, but watching them for a few days, I think I figured it out. They do it because they can. People don't notice. They don't see the doubles or the odd behavior. I don't know how or why no one sees it or why I do. Maybe it's because of my bad wiring or because they're trying to copy me too. He gave a hollow laugh. I do feel like I'm weirdly connected to them now. Like yesterday. The only reason I called you when you were at the diner was because I had this sudden really strong feeling of having just talked to you. I tried to brush it off, but when I couldn't, I worried it meant you were in danger. He set down his glass. Turns out I was right. But why? Why are they doing this? He shrugged. I don't know. To replace us? Infiltrate us? Who knows? Kent stared off for a moment, his expression bleak. I can tell you that I've never seen them talk to each other. No visible signs of communication at all. Shaking his head, he looked up at me. Maybe they're controlled by something else. Puppets? Hell, maybe they don't even know they aren't the real thing. I nodded. Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but I think I can show you something that will shed a little light on it. Kent raised his eyebrows. Really? What is it? I gave him a smile I didn't feel. It's not something I can easily explain. Better than you see it. It's in the guest room. I started to head down the hall, but stopped when I saw how slow he was to follow. Come on, let me show you. It's really something. His face unreadable, he nodded and rose, walking behind me until we reached the closed door. I gestured for him to open it, but he hesitated, looking at me. You go ahead. Sniffing softly, I reached forward and turned the knob, pushing the door open wide. I could hear a sharp intake of breath behind me as Kent saw what was in the room. Lines of ribbons and dried, torn meat that had once been a man. Blood turned to powder and a face that had, but for the shrunken sockets and peeled back lips, would have looked just like mine. I felt the knife go into my side, but I was ready for it. Grabbing Kent's wrist, I twisted hard as I felt a hard pop beneath my fingers. He cried out in pain even as he began to punch me with his free arm. Another twist, and he sank to the ground with a squeal of pain that caused me to wince. Crouching down next to him, I grabbed his throat tightly, trying to be as gentle as the situation allowed. We know we're not them, and yet we don't know. It's like being in a dream that you know is a dream, but you don't like the knowing, so you make yourself forget when you can. I stroked the side of his head as he glared at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. He could still breathe, but just barely, and the fight was out of him now. We don't hate you. Not at all. We love you very much. I felt my vision blur a bit and blinked my eyes clear. Reaching down, I pulled out the knife. When I raised my hand, a pair of withered black leaves were stuck there from the wound. But this thing that drives us, that makes us, doesn't care about you at all. It's very smart and selfish, and it won't stop growing. I could feel Kent's fear continuing to build. I was only making it worse, terrorizing him further and dragging out the inevitable. Sobbing a little, I squeezed tightly and felt his spine give away. A moment more of pain and horror in his eyes, and then he was at peace. Cradling his body, I cried softly for some time before I drank in what his remains had to offer. I know there's another Kent out there, a Kent like I'm an Alan. I understand the logic that despite the strangeness of it all, in time I'll come to fill Alan's life completely. And that part of that will be by accepting this other version of my best friend Kent, and all will continue until all is done. I'll burn these dried up husks of old Alan and Kent after nightfall. It won't take long, and then there will be no proof of these others, these originals. Perhaps then It will be easier to stay in the dream that I am this man, pretending that I was given this life rather than having taken it from another. Or maybe I can hold on to some of this pain, this guilt. Maybe I don't have to fade into a dreaming phantom, only existing to serve this thing that I've come from. If I can only hold on to this desperately fading sense of loss and love and shame, maybe I can become something more. Maybe through such joy and suffering, I can become real. Nobody who ever met Levik Caesar could honestly say that he didn't strike them as a reasonable and polite young man. He was strangely intelligent for his 23 years, and there was something about the way that he spoke that drew people to him. He pondered his choice of words carefully before speaking them, and when he did, they were beautiful and fluid like poetry. Levik Caesar was a man who mostly declined the company of other beings, a man who was more content with his work than his social life. He was rather ordinary to look at least at first, with his slicked back hair and his hazel eyes, but when you looked deeper into these supposedly ordinary features, you'd see the frostiness in his smile, the cruel line of his mouth, and the sinister glitter in the dark shadowed eyes. People who looked past this charming politeness were troubled by what they saw. Levik Caesar seemed to have a different identity hidden behind that smile. This hidden identity was disturbing, dangerous, like a snake biting its time before it strikes. There was whispered conversation between these few people that Levik Caesar was not normal, was not like them, but yet another thing to add to their theories. Even when they were sure that he had not heard a snippet of gossip, he'd pause to smile that disturbing, all-knowing smile at them when walking by. Ludovic ran his own little clinic, for he was a clever, able doctor, and his knowledge and standards easily met requirements. He soon became popular, and although he was little known, he preferred that. He hired no staff, just worked his own business and made his living for himself and his new fiancée, Irene Stratford. She was a pretty, resourceful woman, and was the only person Ludovic could ever be content with. She loved him, but the fact that he seemed to have no family puzzled her. Her own family were long since lost to a car crash, and she'd hoped to be accepted by Ludwig's parents. However, when she asked after them, she was hushed by a frosty reply. "Mother passed away shortly after my birth, and my father is late of 4 years." He didn't mention how his father died. Irene burned with curiosity over her strange fiancé, but she kept it silent because deep inside, she was fearful. She was fearful of Ludovic and his icy smiles and his secret looks and his dark, dark eyes. But the thing that terrified Irene the most was his stare. Every so often, a look would cloud Ludwig's handsome features, a look of pure insanity, uncontrollability, and most of all, wild animal hunger. When he looked at her like that, Irene wanted to flee the room. Often she considered leaving him, but then who knew what he would do to her. Eventually, she summoned as much strength as she could muster and advanced to the lounge to confront him. Ludwig was standing, leaning on the polished round coffee table, fingertips resting on the shining mahogany surface. That inhuman, ravenous look possessed his face, and he seemed to be trying to hold something in. His knuckles sank into the tabletop, and his long, slim fingers folded themselves into his palms into fists. Irene swallowed, took a step back. Levik Caesar glanced up sharply. His face cleared into a surprised, incredulous look. He swallowed. "Irene," he said, his remarkable voice dry, "what brings you here? Look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen something much scarier than a ghost," thought Irene. She took 2 steps forward to control herself. Ludovic removed his hands from the table and casually strolled halfway around the table until he was about 2 meters away from Irene. She held herself just enough not to step back. "Well?" Ludovic raised one slim hand. "Ludovic, I'm afraid," she gushed, and then clasped a hand to her mouth. Ludwig froze. "Why?" he asked. Irene took the hand away. "You look at me in a way that scares me. Ludwig, when you look at me like that, you look as if you want to rip me apart, tear me limb from limb." Ludwig's face was chalk white. He swallowed, and then he moved forward. Irene flinched. Ludwig took her face into his hands. "Irene," he said, his eyes softened. "I love you more than anything. I would never hurt you. Dear God, I value your life more than mine." Conflicting emotions battled across his face. "You have no idea what I have endured," he whispered into her wide-eyed face. "If you, so innocent, so pure, had seen that I have seen—" His voice tailed off. He released her face. "Please, just forgive me, Irene. I would never harm you." He turned, swallowed, and left the room. Ludwig hurried down the corridor and barricaded himself in the bedroom. He sank to the floor, head in hands. "If she knew what I am," he whispered. "If she saw what I've become." Images flashed behind his closed eyes. The carpet stained and sticky, his hands dripping red, his father's severed body sprawling spread eagle across the table. Ludwig gagged, and staggering to his feet, he stumbled to the bathroom just in time. He vomited copiously all over the rim of the toilet, and when he emerged, pallor, sickly, he caught his reflection in the mirror. A white-faced young man on his knees, grasping tears spilling down his cheeks. He stood shakily and made for the bedroom again, his vision blurred, and he collapsed, thankfully, onto the bed as his eyes closed. Ludwig's eyes snapped open. He felt different. Curious, he climbed out of bed and made his way across the room. He was almost at the door when it hit him, the waves of painful hunger crashing into his stomach and bending his body double. He'd only felt this once before, and he remembered the consequence. He struggled with himself to keep it in. It stabbed at his abdomen and he collapsed. His fight ended. When he rose, it was as if Levik Caesar had left his body. His eyes, usually so cold and calculating, were now dark pits of fire, drinking in every last drop of life in the room. His entire face seemed to be in shadow, and his lips were curled in a terrifying smile. His head was slightly bowed, his form even more graceful than before. His entire face seemed to be in shadow, and his lips were curled in a terrifying smile. His head was slightly bowed, his form even more graceful than before. He was silent as he left the room. He was Levik Caesar, and he was famished. His hearing, so much keener than before, caught the light, tuneful sound of Irene's humming as she prepared dinner. Irene. His smile widened. Soundless as a ghost's footsteps, soft as whispers, he walked into the room. She stood at the hob, adding some mixed herbs to a bubbling vat of pasta, unaware of her fiancé watching her as she worked, darkening the doorway like an angel of death. Ludwig cleared his throat. Irene looked up and froze. Her eyes widened in fear. The sauce-covered spoon she was holding slipped between her fingers and fell, and hit the floor with a loud clatter. She stepped back a few paces, hands raised. "Ludwig," she whispered. Ludwig's smile widened even more, and the evil grin twisted his lips. He advanced toward her without speaking a word. Irene stumbled back, tried to run, but she tripped, fell. Ludwig caught her before her body struck the cold stone floor. He roughly yanked her to her feet, then swept them out from underneath her as he dragged her into the lounge. He pinned her to the carpet, lips drawing back from teeth as a ravenous snarl escaped him. He leant in, breathing in the sweet smell of human flesh. And then he struck. His inhumanly strong jaw closed around her throat as it tore at her skin. There were only Irene's screams of agony and the horrible sound of flesh separating from bone. She writhed only a little. The light left her eyes before Ludwig could devour the last of the meat from her throat. Ludovic no longer cared whether she lived or died. All that existed was the flesh, the delicious flesh, and the bright blood spreading steadily outward from her destroyed throat. His animal moans of pleasure were terrifying. This was Levik Caesar, the respected young man, the able doctor, the source of mystery in the town, kneeling on a stained carpet, devouring the last of his loved ones. When, at last, he was finished with her corpse, he left her few remains lying on the carpet. He stumbled less gracefully to the door. Then the nausea, the dizziness struck him about the head. He almost collapsed in the corridor, but he forced himself to his bedroom. He flew across the floor to the bed to sleep. He dropped like a stone to the carpet. When Ludwig rose, his stomach was full of dread. Something horrendous had happened. He pushed himself into a sitting position, testing his stability. He was sick to his stomach with nerves. He knew what was coming. Now trembling like a leaf, he started to gasp, heaving. He flung himself into the bathroom, retching, eyes squeezed shut out of fear of what he might see. When eventually he braved his terror, he regretted it. In the full-length mirror stood a monster. Arms gloved and bright red blood to the elbows. White t-shirt and black trousers spattered with a similar liquid. But the real horror was the face of this gore-covered creature. The mouth and chin were smeared with Irene's blood. Ludwig's eyes widened. His stained mouth opened in a wail of horror. He held his scarlet hands out in front of him and succumbed to his fate. How long he stood there against the wall, he didn't know. But when he looked up, he knew what he would have to face next. He was shivering so hard that if he didn't force himself to the lounge, he would collapse. It was just around the corner now. She was. He edged his way around, and his tall, slender form filled the doorway. Ludwig froze. Terror and horror and self-disgust showed on his face. He stood terrified and blood-stained for several seconds. He staggered forward, a few steps before falling to his knees at Irene's side. He couldn't cry. His grief went further than tears. He just made a horrible, strangled, choking sound and hid his face in his hands. Eventually, he raised his closed eyes to the ceiling. Then they flew open, and Ludwig screamed, a raw, gurgling cry of anguish that nobody could hear. He continued screaming for minutes, hours, years, decades. He screwed his eyes shut again, and a single tear escaped from the corner of his eye and trickled sideways into his hair. His agony was so painful, so destroying, that even the stoniest heart could have been crushed if it had witnessed Ludwig's suffering. He hung over the toilet for a few minutes, but when he didn't bring anything up, he stood, trembling before the mirror. A sudden wave of anger overtook him, and he lashed out at the looking-glass. With one crimson hand, it smashed into countless fragments that sprung apart on separation. Ludwig caught the reflection of his wailing, blood-smeared face in one of the shards as it fell. He reached out and snatched it from the air. He stowed it in the pocket of his black jeans, unaware that he was keeping a fragment of his misery with him forever. He looked to the ceiling, and his unspoken vow was made, like the promise he'd given Irene once upon a time. He would never touch a human being again. For Irene. Levik Caesar walked calmly to the bathroom door, but once he had passed through the doorway, he ran, fury building in his soul. He reached the front door, and with superhuman strength, wrenched the locked door open. He stared out into the blackness, confused by the beauty that could be this hellish world. He took a step forward out of the house, and then he took several more. And then he ran along the grassy path toward the gate. He paused and looked back into the hallway. He turned his face to the sky. "For Irene!" he cried, raising his arms. Then it began to rain. Not depressing, icy rain to gray the sky, but a cool, cleansing rain to wash away the nightmare of the last few hours. Ludovic closed his eyes and let the rain wash the blood from his face and arms. He let the rain fall for a little more time, but when his eyes opened, it stopped abruptly, leaving the ground untouched. No puddles made. He seized the lock on the gate, and it gave within his clasp. He strode out, arms raised to the trees at the edge of the street. The forest. Ludovic spun, face filled with regret, yet also hope that he could find solace once more. He carried on spinning, only stopping at the very edge of the forest, where he let his arms drop to his sides and ran into the waiting night. Ludovic raised his face from the neck of the doe in his arms. He surveyed his surroundings. Sure, he'd heard a disturbance beyond the unusual forest noises, but the clearing he knelt in was silent and full of prospect. He relaxed, releasing the doe to the blood-stained earth. Nothing more superior than a deer had touched his lips since he had devoured Irene 6 months earlier. The forest had become his home, and the fact that people often came here didn't bother him, for Levik would simply hide. He knew how to hide. He winced as the last clumps of meat slipped down his throat. Why did he content himself with such fare when he could dine on finer flesh? Ludovic dug into his jeans pocket and retrieved the shard of mirror taken from his past residence. He saw his reflection's features, taunting and determination. This fragment of him, sane, at least kept him from attacking unsuspecting humans. It reminded him of Irene, of what had become of her because he had given in to brief inhumanity. It still seized him occasionally, but no longer did he blindly kill. After Irene, there would be no more deaths. Little did he know that, even as he sank into the usual unexpected sleep, that when he woke, he would not be inclined to stick to his new regime. Ludovic's body stilled. His ears pricked like an animal's. He scrambled strangely elegant, even as he stumbled to the wall that he flattened himself against. Behind this building, where the pale moonlight could not spill over his long, lean body and reveal his shadow, he listened with his enhanced ears for signs of life. He heard soft snoring from the window above his head. 2 people sleeping a few meters from him. Ludovic's mouth filled with saliva, and he wanted. But no, he told himself, he must bide his time. Bear his hunger until easier prey wandered foolishly into his path. There he stood, hardly breathing, until he heard footsteps and a voice. A shadow fell across his path, and he sank slowly into a crouch. A teenage girl strolled across the street, barely glancing to the side before crossing with superior arrogance, as if no car would ever dare run her over. A mobile phone was clasped to her ear, and she chattered brightly as she wobbled toward the handsome, haggard young man watching her greedily from the shadows. Ludovic's hearing was so keen that he could hear the girl on the opposite end of the phone. "Oh, Shelley, of course not." Shelley tossed her blonde ponytail over her shoulder as she said, "Okay, Darcy, if that's how it is, I'll let you off. Toodles, darling." If Ludovic's cannibalistic form was patient, he'd have waited for less idiotic prey, but beggars cannot be choosers, and his hunger was excruciating. He heard babbling from Shelley's mobile. She laughed and nearly tipped in her stilettos. Her slim white throat was visible from under her turtleneck jumper, and Ludovic's stomach roared in famine. He waited until Shelley had ended the call. He knew his time when it came, and he pounced. He lunged out into the street. Shelley turned just in time to see him and shrieked. Ludovic clasped one hand to her mouth, sufficiently stifling her scream of terror, the other arm bundling her up. Half carrying, half dragging, he began to run, heart banging so hard in his chest that he wondered why it hadn't burst from his abdomen. Shelley writhed and screeched against his palm. Ludovic bared his teeth in a snarl. Shelley turned chalk white and fainted in his arms. It was only as he reached the edge of the forest that she started to come to. Ludwig hurried further into the depths, trying to hold the hunger until he could feed. Shelley was fully responsive by the time they reached the clearing. She saw the crumpled, ravaged body of the doe Ludwig had fed on earlier and started struggling harder, gagging. As they reached the ring of trees, Ludwig dropped her to the leaf-strewn slope. She rolled down and collapsed in a heap in the clearing, coughing. Shelley stumbled to her feet at her last chance of life, but Ludwig's strong, lean body collided with hers, and it took her to the ground. He pinned her to the blood-soaked ground, snarling. He ripped the neck off her designer jumper, tearing the cloth with superhuman strength, revealing her slim, lily-white throat. He howled in delight and bent his head to his meal. Keeping his hand clasped to Shelley's mouth, he tore at her flesh with his teeth. When at last the breath had left her body, he let it drop from her mouth. Once there had been a girl of 17 lying there, now there was just a pile of gore. When his stomach bulged and he had devoured his fill, Ludwig stood, wiping the blood carelessly from his mouth, smearing his chin more. He walked away satisfied. And then he slept. When he woke, he felt none of the horror Ludwig had felt when he had killed Irene or his father. Had he killed Shelley? So, who cared if that made him a monster? If that was what he was, a monster, then that is what he was. He wouldn't hide it from himself. He would glorify in the bloodstains he left behind him. He would let himself be Levik Caesar. He sprinted, thirsty to begin his work. He forgot that it was daytime. He forgot that he was haggard and covered in blood. He forgot that people would see him. He only knew that, as he flew across the forest floor, somebody was going to die. He neared the town, a man a grin curving his lips. As he stumbled into the warm spring sunlight onto his old street, he heard the sound of rattling, a key turning in a lock. Leo Pepper. Leo always rattled his jingly keychain whenever he left the house, and a woman's voice chatting away happily. Yes, Ludwig thought. Yes, Brenda with him. Leo and Brenda were newlywed young adults who were obsessed with each other. They tried to befriend Ludwig once, but he'd always been antisocial and preferred his own company, and did not value their friendship, but did not discard it. They had been in awe of him, and often boasted, as they did when they had something desirable of their acquaintance. And now they would regret the respect they showed him. He slowed his pace and neared them. Brenda and Leo did not notice him at first. They were caught up in some tidbit of gossip. But wait, was that Irene's name? He listened avidly as he drew nearer. So horrible, wasn't it? Brenda was saying to Leo. So young, and to them of all people. They were such a beautiful couple, and we knew them so well. You barely knew my name, Ludwig thought. I'll enjoy seeing your blood flow. They found her body ripped apart in the lounge, didn't they? Leo inquired. Strange. Seemed to have been attacked by something. No sign of Ludwig. He must have been kidnapped or something. Ludwig's blood started to boil. These two idiotic people were making him relive the past, making him feel self-disgust he had not felt for 6 months, and he didn't like it. Now was the time to silence them forever. I killed her, you know, Ludwig began. The two spun around. Brenda screamed at the sight of him, picking his way across the road, ragged and blood-stained. I ripped her throat out, devoured her flesh. I lapped up the blood. Brenda and Leo were backing away, screaming. You're dead, howled Leo. You killed her? Your own fiancée? Brenda shrieked. A smile curved Ludwig's mouth. She was delicious. As you will be, he said. The couple screamed, Cannibal! Cannibal! Get away! He smiled again, and when he spoke his voice was sweet, yet laced with venom. Which of you will be the first to go? He said mockingly to Leo. You or your darling girl? Leo leapt in front of Brenda. Neither, he bawled ridiculously. Brenda phoned the asylum, restrained the lunatic, In God's name, do anything! Ludovic smiled. Know your place, he said to Brenda as he wrenched Leo's head to one side and snapped his neck. She screamed and dropped to her knees. Leo! She screeched, head in hands. 2 seconds later, she was slumped beside her husband, footsteps and raised voices sounding in the street. Who's screaming? What's wrong? Is that Brenda Pepper? Ludovic scooped their unresponsive bodies up over his shoulders. He couldn't stop laughing. He disappeared into the trees. I think, Ludovic pondered as he scraped the last of the meat off Leo's corpse, that I prefer my dinner when it is alive. It was a day later, and since he had taken the peppers, he had sent in fits of glee at his success. He would be clever next time. For he had been 5 seconds slower, he'd be in a disgusting asylum. He, Levik Caesar, would not be confined. He would wait a few days, for he didn't want to be too hasty. He'd been a fool yesterday, taking two in broad daylight. He would operate in the darkness from now on. He had not touched a woodland animal in 2 days, and now he had sampled flesh so fine he could not swallow such filth. He would not. Whenever he was peckish, he would dine off his own kind and ease. Over the next 5 days, he snuck to the town at night and took humans to his clearing where nobody could hear their screams. He was clever, and though now the number of murders he had committed was so great that people were protecting themselves against him, Ludovic could take their lives still. It was one gloomy Wednesday that he let his guard slip. He was pleased, reassured that he was uncovered, and decided to risk daytime activity. He'd reward himself heavily for his troubles, and he would dine like a king, he decided. So that day he made his familiar path to the edge of the forest and slipped unnoticed into the town. Few people left their homes due to Ludovic's grisly nighttime routine, and the few that did were cautious. He waited in the alleyway where he had stolen Shelley a week ago. Soon a group of teenagers came stuttering along, obviously drunk. Easy prey. He'd killed two and had one pinned to a wall by her throat, about to tear her apart when they came. He heard someone say behind him, "Dear God." Ludovic spun, snarling. A group of men and women dressed in uniform, armed with syringes and climbing out of a marked van. The asylum for the criminally insane. He roared and released the girl he was strangling, who fell to her knees, choking. He lunged for the people who were advancing toward him wearily, and was surprised at their agility when they dodged. Snarling like a rabid animal, cursing like a fiend when his lunges did not connect, Ludovic resisted capture for several minutes. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw the one girl who had escaped his wrath being led off by a kindly-looking woman who was soothing her. He darted to the side and snatched the teenager from her as the woman stared in surprise. He bit down into her flesh and tore out her throat. The woman retched. The man behind Ludovic advanced toward him, cursing. One sank a full syringe into the vein in his neck, but Ludovic battered it away irritably. His hands found the woman's throat and began to strangle the life out of her. The men cried out and tried to sedate him with more syringes filled with a pale green serum, but Ludovic knocked them from their hands and sent them spiraling to the ground, where they smashed, puddles of serum forming. When Ludovic tried, he ended it and snapped the woman's neck. As she slumped to the ground, Ludovic spun to face the other two. He speared himself on a syringe by mistake and ripped it out of his arm just in time. He leapt for the man wielding it and gripped him by the throat as he forced him against the wall. As he was choked slowly to death, the man raised his shaking arm and tore open Ludovic's vein, filling it with the serum. As Ludovic tried to bat the syringe from his neck, his eyes rolled, and he was gone before he hit the floor. When he came to, he was in the van. It was moving. He glimpsed the man who'd captured him and tried to seize them, but found himself rooted to the spot on a strange push trolley. He roared with anger and discovered the mask fixed taut against his face. He wore a white straitjacket, his arms crossed over his stomach, hands trapped behind his back. He was completely restrained. As he roared again in his fury at being outsmarted, the man he had throttled turned and rammed yet another ghastly syringe into his flesh. Levik struggled against his bonds, but was powerless as the man pressed the plunger and silenced him once more. Ludwig was free of his restraints when he revived himself. Leaping to his feet, thirsting for blood, he ran toward the glass wall and halted. What was he doing? Why was he in an insane asylum, punished for split blood, when he should be at home enjoying another quiet evening with Irene? What had made him go so far? He had no answer for himself. He collapsed, eyes brimming. He wept then, in the corner of his cell, wept as he had wept for his father, wept as he could not weep for Irene, wept for Shelley, for the people he'd mindlessly slain without knowing so much as their names. He cried until no more tears could spill, and the world was suddenly a living hell. He stood shakily, forced himself into his cramped little bed to sleep. And when the nightmares came, so did his screams, and the women with the syringe who left him lying unconscious. Countless days passed, and each day Ludwig sank deeper and deeper into depression. He spoke little, slept little, ate little. He gave up on life, huddling in his corner, waiting for the silent wings of death. When he did speak, it was to Irene. Hour after hour, he would talk to her about anything that crossed his mind. He was considered less dangerous now. His desire to slaughter was gone, but was treated with more caution than ever. He didn't care. Irene didn't care. She never answered him, but Ludwig was content to talk even so. He was in deeper mourning than ever, but when he talked to Irene, he was almost happy. But then he would think deeper, into the past, to the night when he had killed his father. It was after that he'd worked himself into a violent rage and had not been able to suppress his anger. At 19, he'd been unreachable in his grief. Until Irene. He'd met her in university, aged 20, only just able to face work after his father's demise, and she was in the same course as him. After their second year, she left, but she and Ludwig kept in touch, fell in love, and one day he put a ring on her finger and she pledged her life to him. But now she was gone. Ludwig was suddenly overcome. He rocked on his heels, staring at the floor even though his mind's eyes saw Irene. The tears dripped down his nose and spattered at his bare feet. He spent the rest of the day and all the next standing there. He couldn't take it much longer. He cracked completely. Whispered conversation was made about his mental state. The woman who brought him meals was scared. She knew of this popular clinic as Ludwig had treated her young daughter, saving her life. Now that handsome, composed young doctor sat day after day huddled on the floor, staring into space. Irene haunted him day and night, turned his sleep into torture, ruined him body and soul. One day Ludwig was standing in his cell, thinking about Irene, as if he thought about anything else. He had just woken from sleep, and he had never meant to come, with tears trickling down his cheeks. Ludwig was sick of life at this point. He longed for Irene so badly, but if he could take his own life, what would happen? Would she still love him? How could she, when he devoured her with no love in his own eyes? He wept again, only roused by the woman, Agatha, pushing his breakfast through the hatch. He realized his hunger and ate ravenously. Agatha stared cautiously at him. He'd ignored his past meals. When Ludwig had finished the last dregs of his tomato and basil soup, he thrust the bowl back through the hatch. "More," he croaked, voice hungry. Agatha started. "More," he yelled, pounding on the floor. Agatha rushed through to the room where the owners of the asylum were. "Levik Caesar wants more food, Sir Clinton," she said. He stood up. "Well," Morgana Birchwood said, "I think that's wonderful. Let him have more. Oh, this is perfect. If he does not wish to die any longer, he must be regaining his sanity." "Or," Sir Brompton said, "he's wizened up to us." The room thought about this. I still think that it is a vast improvement, Miss Birchwood argued. Me too, Morgana, but just remember this. He was cannibalistic. May still be. He will never be released upon this world. He may have more food, but we will never have another chance at the rest of his life. Another bowl of soup was brought to Ludovic, and he devoured it greedily. He had lots of weight to regain. He was going to live, be released, and he would go to Irene when his time came. He'd swallow his instincts and become an honorable member of humanity. A month passed, and Ludovic was back to his old self. One night, when Agatha brought him his chicken con carne, he said to her, "Agatha, I believe I'm ready to leave." She said nothing, as if she was not there to witness the elder's conversation. "I no longer have the urge to eat people now, and though I mourn the lives I ended, especially that of my fiancée, Irene, I believe I could start a new life for myself." Agatha was tactful as she said, "And the nightmares, Ludovic? Do you no longer have them?" "No." He was surprised at the lie. It had taken several people to restrain him last night. "Well, Mr. Caesar, I'm afraid you still have them. Brandon, Lolita, and Jason had a hard time sedating you yesterday." Ludovic swallowed. "And as for you being released, I'm sorry, but this is out of the question." Ludovic's face changed. The shadow crossed his face, giving him that inhumane glare he'd not worn for 3 months. "Why not? Tell me!" He slammed his hand against the glass. Agatha shifted from one foot to the other. "Ludovic, surely you know that to release you is madness." Ludovic froze. "You ate people. It's not safe to let you free. You will never leave here." She saw the look on his face. "Ludovic, I'm sorry." It was no use. Ludovic walked over to his bed in a daze and collapsed, face in hands. Agatha tried to plead with him for several minutes, then left, knowing that she would pay for crushing him like that. In his cell, Ludovic was in turmoil. How could he spend the rest of his days in there? How could he stay here, confined within a cage without her, without Irene? He'd rather die than survive several more decades alone. Rather die. Ludovic slipped his hand into his pocket for the one thing that he was allowed to keep. He removed it, letting the fragment of mirror catch the light as he tilted it. He considered it, and then looked to the ceiling. He'd not seen a sky for countless days. Lowering his head toward the glass, Ludovic saw his features cloud in determination. He thought of Irene, her sweet face, her light eyes, her joyful smile. He brought the single fragment of mirror to his throat and flicked his wrist. As Levik Caesar fell, like a marionette whose strings had been cut, dropped like a stone to the floor as he had the night he'd killed Irene. He hit the floor with a thump, throat still open, the shard of blood-splattered mirror still clasped in his fingers. His face a look of childlike wonder that he would never wear again.